Hi, I'm an individual who has much more recently been alternating between Blue Archive and Arknights, moving a bit away from Genshin Impact in terms of my consistency of playing the game. With that being said, in Blue Archive, because I played that game a lot more and because I played more frequently, I had a lot more progress overall in terms of my account progression, who I had summoned for, who I had done and built up properly. And that's kind of reflected in terms of my overall account and the video I make. Even in the Discord server, Blue Archive is a much more populated and active category than Arknights, mostly because I focus a lot on Blue Archive the vast majority of the time. But I've been playing Arknights pretty recently, and I've been slowly going through not only the story, but also building up certain units and sort of learning the curve of the game in terms of difficulty, and I have some thoughts. So today I want to tell you why Arknights is a good game. Well, if I want to provide separation, why it's a good gacha game, but I think overall it's good in general. One of the first things that I like to discuss, and one of the first things that I like to mention about games is how accessible it is. And this doesn't necessarily just mean what you can do or how difficult it is to progress, but what I mean is how approachable is that game from an outside perspective if you know legitimately nothing. I think Arknights has a middle ground. I think it's not necessarily the most accessible gacha game. In terms of guides, there's, a few here and there. And don't get me wrong, there's guides in everything, but in terms of who you have that make them, there's not a large amount of content creators that are focusing on guides with this game. And don't get me wrong, there's been an influx of a lot more people assisting new players or giving advice, whether that be for rerolling, whether that be for building up your account, for base formations, etc. There is a pretty vast amount of resources out there, but don't get me wrong, it's nothing in comparison to something like Genshin Impact, because the community for that game is giant. I think as a community, the Arknights one is much more focused. I think they're a lot more chill and calm than others. And obviously in comparison to Blue Archive, they're much larger. As a result, I think if you're confused about the game, you do have some resources you can access if you need to. And for instance, we have a couple of individuals in the Discord server, joined if you haven't already, who are very willing to help. And I've been bothering them constantly. Another thing I look at is the overall value of certain quality of units. The higher the rarity in the game, usually the better they are. And it means that depending on the gacha game, you can ignore certain lower rarity units, and you oftentimes will. But Arknights is vaguely similar to Blue Archive in that a lot of the units you get will fulfill a certain role at some point, and there's not necessarily a mistake to building them. Higher rarity units are much more expensive to build and much more difficult to sort of progress with. That's not necessarily a blanket statement. I mean that earlier on in the game, even though a unit is high rarity, doesn't necessarily mean they're the best choice for your account at that moment. They may require promotions to essentially unlock the next skill, which makes them good. Or you may not just have the resources to invest in them at the time. Lower rarity units are cheaper overall to invest in, and as a result of that, they perform better early game than some later game units. Don't get me wrong, if you pick up a good unit early on, specifically any of the newbie banner units, they will kind of carry you through early game, but some may drop off later on towards end game. Others you may not just have the resources to invest into and may want to diversify your roster instead to a point where they're kind of left behind for a little bit. And although that sounds bad theoretically, it does mean that you have a wide variety of characters that you can build, whether that because you think they're cute or you like their overall design or their skills or their gameplay. It doesn't necessarily matter. You have a wide options of characters you can build, and many of them are useful to some degree. This means that you're not necessarily funneled into the idea of constantly pulling for a 6-star or a specific 6-star. Don't get me wrong, you can reroll, and rerolling is something I did, but it is not a strict requirement. However, I think we all can mutually agree that Arknights has not only some amazing designs, like if we look at the characters themselves and the overall aesthetic, not only from the lobby to the main menu theme to each and every skin, the character designs are on point. They're amazing. But also, Arknights has some amazing music, like even the themes themselves. If you're just playing them, if you just open up the game and sit on the main menu without actually logging into the game, the main menu theme is a banger. I legitimately have sat there before just listening to it in the background, and I honestly think that's a great thing. If a game has good music and a game has a pretty consistent track record of having good music, it makes you want to play more. I'm not gonna lie when I say that I have built or pulled a certain unit just because of cute. I have. I suggest you do too. Life over meta constantly. That's my mindset. But I think overall, Arknights kind of nails a good new player experience because you are technically restricted by your sanity in game and in real life. But as you're playing through the story and progressing and building up a unit, you're very inclined to level up before you actually hit the bottom line of your sanity. Meaning that as a new player, you can play a lot more, and by the time you actually start needing new resources, whether it be to promote units or build up a base or whatever the case may be, your sanity actually becomes an issue, but you're acquired and accustomed to dealing with it. I think weak as opposed to you hitting a brick wall in that your sanity hasn't changed, but you also haven't needed to really take mind of it. Arknights does a pretty good job of introducing you to the concept without making it so much of a heavy factor early on. For me personally, there is a very small chance that I actively have to worry about my sanity given my count level, but as I progress further upwards, it does become an issue. But it's not becoming an issue in that I want to play more, but I can't. It's more or less an issue that the materials I want to farm aren't available that day, and instead of wasting materials on this, I'll continue to farm rocks all day, because you need a lot of rocks. Arknights is a game about rocks. In a previous video that may or may not have went up or may or may not go up tomorrow, I legitimately do not know what my current schedule is with my videos. I stated that I think that in terms of new player experience, Arknights is on par with Blue Archive, but I think that if I were to recommend a first gacha game, I wouldn't necessarily recommend Arknights. And I still stand by that. Arknights is a great game, and I do love it, and I do think it is legitimately an amazing overall experience, but I think in terms of your first gacha game, I would recommend, depending on what you're looking for, something that feels more like a full game. Or at least the normal game that most individuals would experience. It's why I said Genshin Impact does nail that due to its very Breath of the Wild and anime-like aesthetics. It ultimately is a game that feels the most like a $60 or full priced game before you get to the end game in which gacha becomes the literal content that there is, because there's nothing more. Arknights, however, nailed a consistent schedule and a consistent theme. The game doesn't necessarily force you to pull for characters in the slightest, and all the characters you have are useful to some degree. And to that same effect, I actually recommend it overall because it's a very free-to-play friendly game. You have a good story, you have good character designs, you have character stories, you have good voice acting for the JP. Don't test out the English, please. I have tested out the English and only found like one voice that I can handle. So aside from that, and that's my own personal opinion, I think Arknights has a very consistent high bar for quality, whether that be the music, the designs, the skins, the gameplay, the skills, and the players. Because let's be honest here, certain stages make you want to commit not alive. It also gives you adequate recommendations and introduces concepts to you at a pretty solid rate, I'd say. I think that if you're a new player, Arknights is a great game to start out with. If you're an individual who likes to reroll, I'd recommend doing it during a limited banner. The game gives you solid tutorials and introduces things at a pretty consistent rate when you actually need to. It's not just going to dump everything on you in the beginning and expect you to remember. Instead, it'll wait until you're a proper level in which you can consider something. An example is promotion. The game does not tell you about promotions until later on when you actually may be considering it, and it specifically does it in the sense that a lot of your 3 stars may be ready for promotion, which I do appreciate. So overall, I'd say that Arknights is a good gacha game and a great overall game because it's very hard to hit that consistent level of high quality for years. It's very hard to have a consistent track record of units that seem valuable and a community that's pretty welcoming towards newcomers and pretty knowledgeable on everything to do with the game. Because I'm not gonna lie, I can ask a lot of Blue Archive players something about the game and we may all be mutually confused. It's why the help channel of the Discord server is active all the time. Whereas with Arknights, it's pretty quiet over there. Never mind, we actually just don't have a help channel for Arknights. Join the Discord server if you haven't already, and I'll see you tomorrow. Consider subscribing, leaving a like if you enjoyed, and goodbye.